Hello, everyone. Welcome to another NRCDV Training Institute webinar. I am Yvonne Ortiz, and I'm so glad that you're joining us today for the webinar titled Redefining We, Building Beloved Communities. This training explores new and creative ways to create more equitable services that are rooted in values of justice, healing, equity, and inclusion. Let's get started. Vamos a comenzar. Welcome to today's session. We want to thank NGO CSW66 Forum, the coordinators, for inviting us to present today. And I would like to invite my co-presenter to introduce herself.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being in community with us today as we together define and start the process with building beloved communities. My name is Arlene Vassell, and I am with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. You have our bio, so hopefully you've looked at it. I do want to highlight, I am a proud immigrant from Jamaica. I am a mom. I am an auntie. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a hope dealer. And I am an avid joy seeker. So hello.
Thank you, Arlene. And I am Yvonne Ortiz. I am the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. And I'm proudly part of Arlene's team. And today we're going to have a great conversation. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the chat. We have some time at the end of our presentation for Q&A. So we want to make sure that we answer any question that is posted on the chat. So, and that is it. So let's start our presentation. And of course, you know, it's Arlene and myself, we like to engage in conversation. So this is going to be interactive. And just join us. We want for you guys to be active participants. We have some questions that we would love for you to answer. And it's throughout the presentation. So who are we? Oh, let's start with this question. Arlene?
Yes. So how is your heart? Before we jump into content, we want to really take a moment for you to pause. We're going to talk about some heavy stuff. We're experiencing heavy stuff, you know, in the community around us, all of us. So how is your heart? How is your heart today? I want us all to reflect on what happened to a world in which we can sit with the people we love and have slow conversations about the state of our hearts and our soul. Conversations that slowly unfold, conversations with pregnant pauses and silences that we are in no rush to fill. These lines made a deep impression on Katrina Kenson, the article that I'm reading. Don't we all hunger for breathing room, for peace, for solitary reflection, and also to be seen and understood? Doesn't every heart long for the kind of quiet, one-on-one conversations that allow time and space for vulnerability, intimacy, and soul connection that run deeper than words? So again, I ask, how is your heart doing at this very moment, at this breath? And when I ask, how is your heart doing? What I really want to know is, how are you? I'm not asking how many items you have on your to-do list. I'm not asking how many, whatever you have in your inbox waiting for you. I really want to know, how is your heart doing at this very moment? So in the chat box, tell us, how is your heart? Is your heart joyous? Is your heart aching? I see you. Tell me, is your heart sad? Is your heart happy? Is your heart craving human touch? Thank you, Taylor. I see your heart is content. So examine your heart, explore your soul, and tell me something about your heart and your soul. Heavy, full, aching, and I will slow down. Thank you for the reminder. Full, hopeful, abierto, happily on purpose, hopeful, open, joyful, grateful, heavy, aching, sad, overwhelmed. And you all can keep it coming in the chat box and we'll reflect. And we want to hold all of what you're sharing in the chat box. And we're also holding for, individuals who may not share. And we have to reflect on all of this in order to build the beloved community. Back to you, Ron.
Thank you so much, Arlene. And let's talk a little bit about who we are, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. If this is the first time that you have joined one of our webinars, welcome. We would like for you to follow us on social media, visit our website, and just, so that you can learn about all of the exciting projects and events that we host. We are a national technical assistance provider, and we work to strengthen the capacity of programs responding to domestic violence victims and their families by promoting effective public policy, institutional change, response, research, engagement, prevention. Today we work and we follow key initiatives, and we work with a lot of other organizations from different movements and communities to improve the response to domestic violence and ultimately just prevent its occurrence. So our mission is to strengthen and transform efforts to end domestic violence. You are looking at a document that was created in 2006 by NRCDV staff and board. And this is a position statement. It serves as a way for the movement and for our communities to keep us accountable of our work. This statement is an example of how we are committed to support marginalized communities. And I'm going to read it. We like to read it and to remind everybody how we stand in solidarity to different marginalized communities. We stand with individuals and groups who have been targeted, degraded, threatened, or marginalized because they are Native Americans, people of color, immigrants, women, Muslims, LGBTQ, or people with disabilities. We stand in solidarity against white supremacy, racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, and all other forms of structural oppression. We stand with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, especially those most vulnerable and with limited access to services and protection. We stand together in celebration of the rich diversity of people in this country and the vitality and strength they bring to our communities and society. We stand with those who embrace self-care and community connection as necessary and powerful for social change. We stand with other activists and organizations who continue to work passionately for gender, racial, economic, and social justice for all. NRCDV will continue our work to become an anti-racist organization. We started this journey around 7 years ago, right, Arlene? And we have a promise to use our voice to identify and challenge practices that are deemed harmful to Black victims and perpetuate white supremacy. So you're looking at our promise. And the first one, it's my favorite. We promise to lead boldly in centering and amplifying voices of survivors and traditionally marginalized communities. You're also looking at our theory of change. That is, if we center the lived experiences of survivors of color in order to end systemic racism, we will attain safe and thriving communities. And this is what guides our work every single day. And the work, and today we're going to be, referencing our journey, the work that we've done. It's not easy work. It's really hard work, but our organization and our staff and board is committed to doing this work. So for our time together, we are going to follow the process that we use whenever we are engaging in the same type of work. We're going to be reflecting, visioning, and we're going to be talking about action steps. So we are also going to be referencing poverty and racism, and the inequities compounded by the pandemics. So we are going to be talking about lessons learned from current pandemics and connection to our work to prevent gender-based violence. We are going to be exploring opportunities to reimagine, redefine, and implement advocacy models grounded in equity, resilience, healing, and hope. And of course, we're going to move into action, moving towards transformation in our organization, in our communities. And Arlene always mentions that for some people, this is a wake-up call. It's time for action. But for others, and I know that there's so many with us today, this is a confirmation of the work that we need to do and the work that they've been doing.
Thank you, Yvonne. So the title of our presentation, Beloved Community. So in your own words, what does beloved community mean to you? Again, in the chat box, Yvonne mentioned that it's going to be interactive. So we're going to ask questions because we're just not here to give you information. We're here to engage in a conversation. And the chat box is the best the best way for us to do that right now. So beloved community, thank you. Beloved community is safe, caring, nurturing, yes. A community of support, diverse, supportive, happiness, safe, support, togetherness, where I belong, yes, empowering, peaceful, full of love and compassion. You can keep those coming. Yvonne, next slide. So how do we get to a beloved community? What are the barriers? Beloved community is a concept and approach that Dr. Martin Luther King introduced to us a very long time ago. And NRCDV is committed to bringing this approach back to our work, back to communities. It's back to basics, beloved community. Again, you know, we've talked about it for a very long time. So I want you to reflect on imagine a safe and racially equitable community. What does that feel like? What does that look like? A lot of what you already included in the chat box, right? And for me, that's beloved community. Again, how do we get there? We're going to explore some options. We're going to share some strategies that we've implemented at NRCDV, and we're going to share some other examples that we deem to be credible as we all, again, work towards a beloved community. But at first, you have to reflect. You have to reflect on what does that mean for you? What does that mean for your organization, right? And what does that mean for your community? We'll talk more about your community. Do you know your community? Because in order to build beloved community, you actually have to know your community. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. And I am slowing down. Yvonne, next slide. All right, so when we talk about beloved community, we're talking about the difference between equality, equity, and our current reality. Equity is what we're going for, right? Racial equity is giving different groups of individuals different resources so all groups can be on the same level. So we're not, you know, pursuing equality. And we do want to address our reality. Equity is basically what we're talking about in this presentation. And when we talk about beloved community. Next slide. So chicken soup, deepening community, finding joy together in chaotic time. So I think chicken soup is something that resonates with all of us across cultures, across ethnicities. It's just all about togetherness, connectedness. And let me talk to you about what Paul Bourne says as it relates to chicken soup. So the chicken soup story, he mentioned it many times over the past 30 years, especially in connection with the work I've done with others more recently to engage communities in reducing poverty. So again, Dr. King focused on poverty as one of the barriers that prevents us from creating beloved communities. What the most important thing people can do to make a difference in the world, he said. That's simple. I almost always reply, bring chicken soup to your neighbor. And the response that he always gets is, really? And Paul says, I say yes, and then add. But remember, I said the answer is simple, but the act of bringing soup, well, that's the work. How so? It requires that you know your neighbor. It requires that you know they are not a vegetarian and like soup. It requires that you know them well enough and communicate regularly enough to know they are sick. Once you know they are sick, you must feel compelled to want to help and to make this a priority among the many calls on your time and energy. Your neighbor must know you well enough to feel comfortable in receiving your help. And you must have enough of a relationship to know what they prefer when they are sick, whether it is chicken soup, fowl, chana masala, or even ice cream. So you see, the work takes place long before you perform the act of bringing soup. I think you would agree that the challenge for so many of us today is to find the time, the energy, and the desire to do the work of being a good neighbor, even to stay close to members of our own family, for that matter of fact. Many of us find ourselves stretched to keep in touch with one another, to share in one another's lives, to strengthen community together. I believe that a combination of the state of the environment and the economic.
Arlene, please slow down.
Okay. All right. Okay. The economy, the stress of our jobs, and the sped up nature of life through new technology is making it difficult for us to invest ourselves in community. And also, there's another resource, next slide, Yvonne. An inspiring celebration of the joy, challenges, and triumphs of being African American. So this is a book, again, talking about chicken soup, but this is talking about chicken soup for the African American soul. And in this book, Iana Vincent and Terry McMillan, they talk about celebration of joy, the celebrations of joy, challenges, and triumphs of being African American. So again, when we're talking about chicken soup, it resonates across countries, it resonates across ethnicities, but it looks different, right? So we, again, have to get to know our community, have to get to know each other, have to get to know the trials, the barriers, the gaps, when we especially talk about beloved community. Paul also talked about 4 concepts, right, of building beloved community, of building, deepening community. And he talks about sharing our story. He talks about enjoying one another by spending time together. He talks about caring for one another. So we're intentionally avoiding hierarchies. We're encouraging each other to practice self-care. And we're also extending that same grace to ourselves, right? That we extend to others as it relates to self-care. So all of this, the concepts of deepening community and also building beloved community. And then how do we work together to build a better world? How do we avoid reverting to fear-based community, where it's us against them, especially when we're talking about abusers? How do we hold each other accountable? And how do we hold abusers accountable? How do we promote safety for everyone in our communities? And that's basically what deepening community is about. That's basically what beloved community is about. Next slide, Yvonne. So again, and you'll get the PowerPoint, and there's a lot of reflection throughout the PowerPoint for you to focus on after our time together today. And how is the new reality impacting your relationships with others? So what barriers are you facing in order to build beloved communities? Next slide, Yvonne. Again, we talked about your community. Who lives, works, play, grow, and age in your service area, in your community, where you live, where you play, where you work, where you age? Who are your community leaders? And how would you describe the relationship between you, your organization, and your community currently? And we also have to talk about the inequalities that you're seeing and witnessing and experiencing in your community. So as you reflect on your community, again, these questions, these prompts are available for you to do your work like Yvonne said, we're going to reflect, right? And you have to do the reflection, the deep reflection, in order to go forward into transformative action. Next slide, Yvonne. So the next couple of slides will give you a reflection on beloved community from various individuals, including Dr. King's approach from the King Center. So we won't read them all, but I do want to highlight some things that are lifted up in all of these various perspectives on beloved community. So the Resonance Network, they talk about beloved community as actions that flow out of commitments, right? And it's intentional relationship building with your family members, neighbors, coworkers, and others on a daily basis. Next slide, Yvonne. Again, we're going back to Dr. King's beloved community. And Dr. King really focused on addressing poverty, hunger, hopelessness, and all of those will not be tolerated. Racism of all forms, discrimination, bigotry, prejudice will be replaced with an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. So we're talking about justice, we're talking about equal opportunity, and we're talking about love of one's fellow human beings. Next slide, Yvonne. Move to End Violence talks about beloved community as both our destination and the way forward, right? So what we're saying is, in order to achieve a future in which every girl and woman is valued, respected, and able to reach their full potential, we must find new ways of being with each other that are rooted in love, compassion, and grace. Next slide, Yvonne. So these are the 6 principles from Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence, right? So when we talk about, again, beloved community, this information is available through the King Center that you can actually access and digest, right? And sit with and reflect on and connect back to you, yourself, connect back to your work. Again, it resonates across cultures. And we wanted to talk about a model that really can resonate with anyone in any part of the globe, because this was a global approach that Dr. King really shared, and we want to lift up in the United States and again, outside of the United States. And so principle 1, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people, right? It's a method of resistance. It's being bold, it's being aggressive spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Principle number 2 is around nonviolence seeks to win friendship and understanding. And the main point around principle number 2 is that the end result is really around redemption and reconciliation. And principle number 3, nonviolence seeks to defeat justice or evil, injustice or evil, and not people, right? So again, when we talk about working with abusers, when we talk about evil individuals, when we talk about individuals who cause harm, who choose harm, right? We're also wanting healing pathways for those individuals. We're also wanting services. We're also wanting to respond to their needs as well. Because what we do know that individuals who cause harm are also victims of various forms of injustices as well. So we're focused on injustices and evil and not people. That might be harder for some. That conversation was very hard for me at one point, but I understand now in order to create beloved community, that is an area that we need to explore and explore more deeply. And then the other 3 are available. Again, if you need additional information, I would suggest going to the King Center and becoming more familiar with these philosophies. Yvonne, next slide. So I also highlighted in the presentation the 6 steps to nonviolent social change, right? So it's all about information gathering. It's all about education, personal commitment, negotiation, direct action, and reconciliation, right? And you have to reflect as an individual, as an organization, where are you? What are you able to do? Where are your areas that you need to grow? Where are your areas that you need to dig deeper? Information gathering is basically about looking at an issue, being able to understand it, articulate it from your perspective, and also the perspective of our opponents, quote unquote. We need to know their the information that they're holding on to as well. We need to be informed about our opponents, their decisions, their ways of thinking. Again, education, right? We have to be informed about our issues and the issues of our opposition as well. Daily check-in, you have to, there has to be a personal commitment. Your work for justice has to be a part of who you are. I would say a part of who you need to be, right? How you need to be the work, right? Not just talk about the work. So what does that personal commitment look like? And then the negotiation, that's some of where personally I struggle as well. We need to do that with grace, with humor, intelligence. We need to confront the other party with a list of injustices, right? And then the direct action. And then reconciliation, of course. Each act of reconciliation is one step closer to that beloved community that we all desire. Yvonne, next slide. This is a resource. Most of the information pulled from here and Dr. King and the King Center. So I would again recommend that you dig deeper. We only have a little bit limited amount of time together today. So I want to offer this as a resource. Next slide, Yvonne. And also the Full Frame Initiative, another organization that's focused on well-being, that's focused on some concepts that are similar to beloved community. So giving you additional information, additional materials to be able to connect the dots in your community and outside of your community. The Full Frame Initiative basically believes that all of us, from president, postal worker, single mother, senior citizen, adolescents to adult, we share the same set of universal needs and that are critical for our well-being. And these essential human needs are what the Full Frame Initiative defines as the 5 domains of well-being. And here you have social connectedness, stability, safety, mastery, and meaningful access to relevant resources. So again, another resource that I suggest that you all access and get more familiar with, because it actually connects the same concepts that Dr. King introduced in Beloved Community. Next slide, Yvonne. All right. So
yes. Now that we talked about Beloved Community, let's talk about something else. We need to redefine we. And this is another hard one, because when we think about we usually stay in our silos, in our clusters, in our small families, instead of thinking about we as a community. So this image that you're seeing, it's from our One Thing campaign, Redefining We during COVID-19. And it's a campaign that connected our intervention and prevention efforts during October and year on. So the question is, how do we need to be? Who do we need to be? What do we need to change? So those are 3 questions in order for us to pivot our work and change the we. So think about that. This is our time. And that truly, we have experienced many things in the past 3 years. And it's at this moment, we're bearing witness as a pandemic of racial injustice, systemic oppression, and exploitation continues to rage across the country, causing many losses. So this is the time for us to take action, to look into our communities, to see who we are, how are people seeing us, and what do we need to change in order to create that beloved community. This is what you're looking at. It's part of our statement on how we must dismantle anti-Blackness in order for us to create this beloved community. This moment is a call for transformation. And we see and we hear across, social media, across the news, that this is our time to take action. A critical opportunity to revisit the roots of our movement to end gender-based violence in ways that we can purposely restore humanity for all. And if you want to read the entire statement, you can find it on our website at nrcdv.org. So what is the connection between gender-based violence, structural racism, and other forms of oppression? That's a question. And if you have an answer, please add it in the chat. And it's interesting because we do a lot of technical assistance at the NRCDV, and we talk with a lot of organizations that want to become anti-racist. But we have other ones that don't think that this is a priority because they don't see the connection between all of these oppressions and the movement against gender-based violence. So tell me, what is that connection? What comes to your mind? Why do we need to do this work? As I mentioned, both domestic violence, we call it gender-based violence globally, are both forms of oppression. They both center the ability to exert power over another person. And sometimes it's similar tactics to abusers. It's using silence, silencing, degrading, and ostracizing people. And when people in positions of power hold oppressive beliefs, their beliefs shape and become solidified in our legal system, in our government, schools, and even in a lot of social services agencies. This makes it harder for survivors to seek support, to heal, to receive justice, and ultimately live lives free from violence and oppression. So yes, peeling the layers back to get to the root causes, as we say. Thank you. Lack of equity and equality in marginalized groups that are unable to seek justice by ignoring them and their voices. Exactly. It is an ecosystem, all is connected. It is institutional in this country, and I'm reading the chat. Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, we tend to think if we have done work in this area, we tend to think that we got it, right, Arlene? We just get it. But sometimes when we pose a simple question like this one, it's harder for us to understand the true connections and why it's important. It's an important part of our work. And I want to share with you a quote from a survivor. And it says, "I didn't realize how Black I was until I left home." And let's hold that for a moment. This is one of many survivors that truly are unable to access the services and support that they need to live a violence-free life, only because of the way that they look, only because of the color of their skin. So racial justice is our work. Economic justice, anti-poverty, utility rights, housing rights, wage equity, health equity, employment rights, voter rights, closing the digital divide. All of this is racial justice work. And all of it is necessary to prevent the power-based violence that exists at all levels of the social ecology. So our work to end their gender-based violence connects all movements working to dismantle power-based violence. And we need to always remember that we are a part of a much larger movement. And at the root of all, it's racial inequity. Going back to beloved community, to what Arlene was talking about, community, we need to stop working in silos. There are many movements, there are many movements out there, and we can all work together. And one thing that I already mentioned, and this work requires risk taken, discomfort, and the deliberate shifting of power and resources. This is the bold work that racial justice requires.
So Yvonne, before we go on to understanding the intersection, I want to like bring that quote back into this space, because usually I'm always like holding that quote when we ask what's the connection between gender-based violence and structural racism and various forms of oppression. So when this quote was shared with me, again, I continue to hold it because anti-Blackness is just so prevalent in our gender-based violence movement. Advocates, survivors, all experience, right? Anti-Blackness. So oftentimes when we're talking about structural racism and we're talking about other forms of oppression, right? Typically, it's uncomfortable is the word I'll use for individuals to address the anti-Blackness that's prevalent in most of our movement spaces. So I just want to bring the survivor's voice back into the space. This is an individual that left an abusive relationship and after leaving that relationship is when the re-victimization, right? Continue to happen and the person continue to be re-traumatized in our movement spaces. So I just want to bring that into the space. I want to name anti-Blackness as a barrier, as an issue for us to co-create beloved community. All right, you can move on. And as you're moving on, I am trying to slow down.
It's hard. It's hard.
Oh my goodness, it's never been this hard. But anyway, all right. So understanding the intersection, Yvonne talked about that earlier. You have it on the slide. Yvonne, next slide. I do want us to reflect on. So we've talked about beloved communities. We've given you some basic foundational information about beloved community. Yvonne has talked about other intersecting issues that highlights this is our work. So what I want you to reflect on is how do we collectively, all of us, support survivors, advocates, preventionists in creating culturally responsive and empowering spaces and thriving communities while we dismantle these bias systems. So the key here is it's an and, right? We have to do both. We have to enhance responses, and we also need to create thriving spaces, and we also need to dismantle bias systems. Next slide, Yvonne. So that's a challenge for all of us. That's our work, because trauma happens at the intersection that we all know. Survivors, advocates, facing violence, facing oppression, facing marginalization. And so what does that look like for us, for our organizations? Next slide, Yvonne. When you're working with communities of color, things for you to remember, there's different attitudes. Ooh, I'm gonna read it. That's definitely
okay.
Different attitudes and expectations about help seeking. Mainstream interventions oftentimes create additional barriers, the biases that we talked about. There's a mistrust of mainstream formal systems, the overrepresentation of white people in positions of leadership with decision-making power. And we'll talk specifically about how NRCDV is addressing that overrepresentation that we've acknowledged in this movement work. Yes, Mercedes, thank you. And then formal systems that do not include alternative resources or alternative ways of thriving and healing and surviving, right? We oftentimes in formal systems have a script of what intervention should look like or what healing strategies should look like. And we don't have spaces created for culturally responsive healing opportunities for individuals, for survivors, and for advocates. And then when working with communities of color, we also have to acknowledge, like I had mentioned before, and Yvonne mentioned, the structural and institutional racism. And as you can see, we noted daily, right? So it's not occasionally, like Yvonne mentioned, the COVID-19 and the ongoing oppression and injustices that our communities are experiencing now is new. It's alarming for some people, right? But for many of us, we know this is a daily experience of communities of color. So how are you reflecting on that within your organization and within your particular communities? Because we can all, beloved community sounds great. It sounds like a thing that we want. We all want that. Many people expressed in the chat box what beloved community looks and feels like, right? But we also need to acknowledge who we need to be. How do we need to show up? Knowing everything that we've learned over the last 400, but I will say for the purposes of our presentation, the last 2 or 3 years, right? So how do you lean into the transformative change that's needed globally, right? Because we have a global audience. Next slide, Yvonne. So again, courageous commitment to love, leading with bold vision and purpose. And again, moving beyond the question of what do we need to do to, like I had mentioned before, who do we need to be, right? So who do I need to be? Arlene needs to decide that. Who do you need to be? You would have to decide that. And collectively, we put all of our beings together in order to attain, right, this transformation that we all seek and that we all want, that is that beloved community. So I ask you, like, who do you need to be? And take some time after our presentation to figure that out. Who do you need to be? It's the ongoing reflection for me every day. So now I'm doing like an intention setting every day because I really need to show up in an intentional way in order to dismantle everything that I know our people as people who are marginalized, people who live at various intersections, navigate this work and navigate this movement. Move on. So again, some trauma-informed intersectional approach. Trauma-informed is the language that resonates with a lot of people. The intersectional part is what people tend to not talk about. So I just wanted to offer this as well. So we have to, again, acknowledge the multiple systemic barriers. We have to center the voices of individuals most impacted. We have to value and honor diversity. So what I'm talking about there is cultural humility. It's an ongoing learning process. You're learning from both sides, like I had mentioned, as far as Dr. King's beloved community principles. And then you're collaborating across social justice movements, examining inequities, getting to know your community, long-term investment in your community, and supporting and building upon positive outcomes that already exists in your organizations and in your community. Yvonne?
So now it's a call to action, meeting the moment. So what do we do? You're looking at another one of our campaigns for social media and also border justice without racial justice. And you see that's part of the One Thing, Una Cosa campaign for from the Domestic Violence Awareness Project at the NRCDV. So commitment to this moment, it's important. And we need to re-examine how we're doing our work and how can our work look different to center those most impacted. So you see, we need to be the work and not just do the work. And that's important. We keep on saying it, we cannot work in silos. We need to be present. We need to address the root causes, dismantling white supremacy, and engaging with survivors, advocates, and communities. And this morning we were having a conversation about engaging survivors. And the question that arose was, when did we stop centering survivors? When was that? What did that happen? Was it when our anti-domestic violence movement turned academic? When was it? So we need to go back and reflect on that question. We need to also center healing and reconciliation. And of course, and this is something that at the NRCDV, we talk a lot about, celebrating Black joy, love, pride, creativity, resilience, and liberation. And of course, cultural humility. And that it's another very important thing. Me as a Puerto Rican mixed race woman, I can tell you that I don't know everything. I don't know everything. People tend to think, well, you're a person of color, so you know about all the, no, I'm still on a journey. I'm still learning. So thinking about cultural humility, asking questions, getting to know we, that's what's important in order for us to build a beloved community. So justice is not revenge. Rather, justice is a proactive commitment to providing each person with the material and social conditions in which they can both survive and thrive as a healthy and self-actualized human being. And this is a quote from Michael Denzel Smith. And it's important for us to define justice as the US legal system that has prevented our sense of it. It cannot be punishment or retribution for harm caused. Justice is not revenge. Rather, justice is a proactive commitment to providing each person with the material and social conditions in which they can both survive and thrive. And this is a quote from that article. We also need to think about exploring alternatives to seeking justice that center the safety and well-being of communities who experience systemic oppression. And this is an image from one of our TA questions of the month. You see Bonnet there, that's our online library. And the topic was on transformative justice, and it was written by Laura Chow-Reeve on youth engagement. She's a youth engagement manager with the Virginia Sexual and Domestic Violence Action Alliance. And it shows that transformative justice is a political framework and approach for responding to violence, harm, and abuse without creating more violence. And this is really important for us to sit with and think about. It explores how to know the difference between punitive justice and restorative justice and transformative justice. It's a framework for our primary prevention work. It's gender-based violence and state violence that are connected, knowing that and understanding that. You can find more information and access this magnificent TAQ, Technical Assistance Question of the Month, in our online library, Bonnet. When we're going to be sharing that information with you. So let's talk about some more strategies. And these are created, and you see the information at the bottom of the slide by Maggie, and I hope that I'm pronouncing it correctly. Arlene, please correct me. Potapchuk.
That's fine.
Okay, and she describes 3 broad pathways for achieving goals related to race relations and racial justice. And as you can see there on the slide, she talks about individual, intergroup approaches, and institutional approaches. And the individual, they focus on building the knowledge, awareness, and just building the skills of each individual so that they can increase their cultural and racial awareness, so working from the person. And then second one is intergroup approaches, bringing people that are different ethnic groups, different backgrounds together to dismantle those stereotypes. So bringing community to learn about each other. And institutional approaches that focus on strengthening the capacity of organization and institutions to communicate and talk about the issues that we're talking today: race, how to mobilize for change, how to advocate for more inclusive policies. And those three approaches are really important, and they're required to make progress on this racial equity journey that we're talking about.
Yvonne, I think the thing that I want to highlight with this too is that this was back in 2004, right? So when we talk about action, it's 2022, and this is all still relevant and all still needed. Yeah.
We also have been talking about, collaboration as a strategy for social change. And you can read it. I'm not going to read all of them, but it's time for us to engage in partnerships. Again, we cannot do this, when I'm repeating myself, we cannot do this work in silos. It requires that all of us think about integrating an intersectional and multi-layer approach. In working in collaborations, we can build new systems that will benefit our communities. And of course, and here we go again, honoring the voices of our communities through collective work. There's so many leaders out there. Sometimes when I talk to local programs, they tell me, oh, but there's nobody in my community representing, let's say, for example, my community, nobody from the Latino communities, no leaders. And again, we need to redefine who we are, who is part of your communities. There's people in your community that are doing amazing work. They're leaders in your community. It's getting to know who is doing the work, taking the time to get to know them and following their lead. It's as easy as that, following the lead of traditional and marginalized oppressed groups. It's the path to dismantle systems of oppression. Another idea is finding common ground. You need to identify shared principles, honor those different views and values that are part of your community, and creating justice to social change, creating safety and fostering trust, and building autonomy through a strengths-based model. So it's important for us not to focus on our differences, but to look in our communities what we have in common, and just listen. Make those, those spaces so that you can get to know each other. So here we are meeting the moment, embracing new approaches to healing, health, safety, and justice. And Arlene, this is the time for us to do things differently. Mm-hmm. And as you said, from 2004, she developed that framework. Well, I think we cannot come up with any more excuses for not committing to this work. This is the time. And we need to explore strategies for connecting the dots between our awareness and prevention work. And again, building meaningful relationships. And Jacqueline Miller, our director of racial justice, she's always talking to us about relational versus transactional relationships. So it's thinking about how can I build a relationship that is going to create change, that is going to transform my community. And that's the important part. This is another image of one of our campaigns that was developed by the Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisors Group. And it tells you awareness plus action equals social change. And it was created for Domestic Violence Awareness Month and beyond. It describes the process of moving people into collective action to advance social change during domestic violence awareness and beyond, starting with one thing. What's your one thing? You can get more information about this campaign and many other campaigns at our website is dvawareness.org, where you can find a number of great resources and free downloadable materials that you can use all year round.
Yvonne, I think I also want to highlight that on the dvawareness.org website, we have several materials that further explain that formula that individuals can use in their community, that they can use with their organizations to really connect the dots between our awareness efforts and our prevention efforts. And that's why we have the awareness plus action. The action is actually our prevention efforts.
And now let's talk about storytelling. Our movement was born from stories of survivors. That's how we started. And here are two examples of the use of storytelling to promote, our work. And you can see that survivor stories benefit not only survivors, naming their experiences and reclaiming power, but it's also for them an important step for healing and resilience. And for us, the rest of the community, it benefits us by inspiring us to action, to take a stand, gives us hope, strength, and unity. And it also helps us be prepared and want to learn more and educate ourselves on how to serve and to center our survivors. And here are two great examples. The G word is transformative storytelling, and it's G word and then transformative storytelling. The G word, it's a global storytelling platform from Breakthrough, designed to explore and break through the limits of gender expectations. The project encourages people to read, listen other people's stories about gender-based discrimination and violence, and share their own stories in order to connect, heal, and take bold action to challenge violence. And then the other one at the bottom, the transformative storytelling for social change project, break through the limits of gender expectations and to spark social justice movements and influence policy, and provides examples and guidance on creative and visual storytelling methods. So again, we were calling you into action, and these are some steps that you can follow. And again, we need to think about that this work cannot be done unless if you turn inward, if you begin to think about healing ourselves and continue with our individual relationships, our organizations, and our communities. We need to integrate building beloved community principles into our awareness prevention efforts. And we need to put everything together. And we're talking about beloved community when practice creates the possibility of finding common ground with other social justice movements. Again, building relationships. And we go back to that in order to heal people and community.
And Yvonne, Nina had mentioned in the chat box about in order, her perspective on us healing ourselves and loving ourselves, right? So this part is just affirming that, right? It's like we have to turn inwards, right? We have to do our own work. We have to heal ourselves, love ourselves in order for us to contribute, right, to creating thriving relationships, organizations, and communities.
And also, how do we craft that narrative? If we want to end domestic violence, we need to have healthy families and communities. And we need to, think about that, our prevention forces us to shift the focus from what we want to stop to what we want to achieve. So now is the time, this is why we're calling you to action, to shape that narrative, to change the way of thinking so that we can transform our communities.
So typically what is said is we want to end domestic violence, right? So what we're encouraging you all to do as we continue to do the same thing is talk about building healthy and creating healthy families and thriving communities. And then we will end domestic violence.
Yes, yeah. Dr. King's beloved community is a global vision, like Arlene mentioned, in which people can share in the wealth of the earth. And here's just, it's basically, have we been doing our work with our brains or with our hearts. So that we're trying to tell you today is that you need to live with the heart. This is hard work. And we're reminded about that all the time. You cannot just focus on just, the words, the knowing the theory of how this work looks like. You need to work with the heart in order for it to be successful. Mutual aid that you're listed there, we have the beloved community, following beloved community steps, mutual aid and community-based models and safety support and prevention. Mutual aid, for those of you that don't know, it's a voluntary reciprocal exchange of resources and services for mutual benefit. Again, it's about collaboration, learning from one another, and that's what's important. So again, another reflective question for you is, are you working with your brain or are you working with your heart? And another beautiful image that talks about what we need and what we can accomplish. We connectedness, we need to focus on the resilience, on wellness of our communities and our own. And sometimes prevention is really hard for people to understand because the goals and the effects are very abstract and absent. And sometimes if you are not, like a lot of communities, you're not connected to the work, you think that nothing is happening, that this is just something that we don't need to address. But there's some protective factors that we need to think about when doing this work. We need to celebrate, we need to think about equity. We need to build and talk about survivors' resilience. And again, you see it there, connectedness. Celebrate each other, celebrate our achievements, and most important, equity, hope, and wellness in order for us to create this beloved community. I'm trying to pass the slides really slow because they just move so fast. So what are healthy and thriving communities? They are safe environments that are based in community connections, health equity, access to resources, economic stability, housing security. So in order for us to connect with one another, we need to use language that resonates with our intended audience across from disciplines and social justice movements. And truly, the only way that we know, and we're going to learn about what language to use, is if we connect with one another, if we build collaborations. A shared horizon, so we can do this work. We can do this work, and we must. We need to connect our work and to other movements with a shared horizon of the change that we want to see. Our goal is to have healthy families and communities. So we must come together, we must collaborate as a part of a larger social justice movement. Alongside with those with aligned goals, those who share a vision, we can achieve so much more. We can achieve that shift in the culture that we want to see. So if we can work collaboratively as a part of a larger social justice movement, then we are going to be working alongside those with aligned goals, and we're going to be able to achieve the goal that we want to see in our communities. Frameworks Institute, on their document Reframing Childhood Adversity, Promoting Upstream Approaches, created six recommendations, and here are some highlights of how we achieve that. And the recommendation number one is make the story one, where we all have a stake and a role in outcomes that matter, where we all benefit. So what we're seeing in a lot of our movements is that there's only one story from one perspective. So the first recommendation is just make it one, have everybody's voice together coming into one goal, and show how external conditions get under the skin to shape health, development, and outcomes. Emphasize root causes and possibilities for change. And number 5, it's don't talk about the impact of adversity, just focus on the resilience of people, resilience of survivors. And number 6, always include a proven or promising policy level solution. Frame the problem as a systemic issue, then offer solutions aimed at fixing the problem instead of fixing the people.
Mhm. Yes.
Well-being is our work, and we know it. We have learned that our work is more broad than we have imagined. And we need others to understand this as well. We need to create models of individual and community resilience that are so needed and that are truly abundant. And so we see that we need to come up and think about justice, resilience, and healing. And I think throughout our presentation, that has been the theme. If we don't work on healing, we're never going to be able to achieve our goal. So with justice, the greater level of justice we experience, the higher of our well-being. And so this is important for our common goal. And also, we talked about storytelling. We need to continue to center survivors of domestic violence and sexual abuse. We need to make sure that our communities are represented. Not, let's try away from tokenism. We need to actually have spaces for leaders from our community, our conversation. We need to show up, like it says there. We need to have those courageous conversations and build allyships. And we need to involve and work for those communities most impacted, have a voice, leadership, and where their ideas are centered. And one thing that as an advocate and the times that I work providing direct services, having those voices and ideas centered from those marginalized are going to help you build programs that are successful. Before, we would sit down around a table and create programs for a community. Now, what we are hoping that we do is create programs that the community creates themselves and for the community, by the community. That's the work that we need to do.
All right. So out of what Yvonne just showed around storytelling, allyship, working with communities most impacted, and representation matters, we're just going to give you a couple examples of representation and how NRCDV is addressing the issues that we know to be true in our movement. Next slide, Yvonne. So NRCDV had a goal around, we were strategic in our strategic planning process in 2015, where we had a goal around movement building and leadership, because we recognized the overrepresentation of white women in the gender-based violence movement. So we have the Women of Color Coalition Leadership Project presently. That's the name. That name may change, but that's a part of an overarching goal at NRCDV to build a coalition of courageous leaders willing and able to transform the field. So we have several activities across various teams at NRCDV that's connected to that goal. Our work and our activities are connected to that goal. If you're interested in learning what we're doing across teams to address this goal, feel free to reach out to us. Our information is at the end of the presentation. But again, I'm going to focus on the Women of Color Coalition Leadership Project. For this project, we're doing actually a national study led by Dr. Nakiru Nawazi that really looks at the domestic violence movement, look at the overrepresentation. We have an intergenerational advisory group that's also working with us on the recommendations and implementation of the strategies. So Dr. Nawazi started out a few years ago, did a literature review, did interviews with women of color, ranging from, with varied length of, I would say, experience with the movement. Some are still in the movement, some left the movement, and came back to the movement. So various experiences, but all committed to furthering women of color advancement. Out of the literature review, out of the interviews, one reoccurring theme was women of color were tired, just tired. Over and over again, that came up, tired of being disrespected, tired of being belittled, tired of being dismissed, tired of being unwelcome, just tired of being tired, right? So the group developed some recommendations around advancing women of color leadership in the movement. And what you have here on the next few slides are the recommendations that came out of that work. And NRCDV now has positioned ourselves to implement about 2 or 3 strategies from these recommendations over the next few years. One of the key things that came out of the recommendations that I want to share is the need for us to reframe the issue, right? The overrepresentation of white women in the gender-based violence movement instead of the underrepresentation of women of color. Because what that does is uses language that reflects the root causes of the racial disparities that we're experiencing in the United States as it relates to our gender-based violence movement. It intentionally shifts the focus and put the onus on white supremacy rather than the perceived deficit of women of color. There's also a strategy around flexible funding. You can learn more about that by reaching out to us. That is actually one of the strategies that we are going to implement over the next couple of years. Next slide, Yvonne. The group also wants us to increase opportunities for women of color in positions on the ground to meaningfully participate in strategic planning and decision-making within organizations and the larger movement. And while we're bringing this into this space, because again, we have individuals attending from across the country and globally, and we've heard that this is an issue regardless of where women of color are working. Women of color are deemed most of the time as doers in organization and not thinkers. So therefore, they're not included in strategic planning and decision making. So when we talk about representation matters, right? It's really important that we have women of color in spaces where strategic planning and decision making is happening. Because if not, what happens, the ideas of women of color tend to show up as groundbreaking, innovative, I'm using words that people like to use, groundbreaking, innovative strategies. But then the credit is then not given to the individuals who had the ideas in the first place, right? Because women of color are behind the scenes creating and contributing, but it's not seen as strategic planning until someone else take those ideas and actually actualize them and take credit for them. So it's important that we're naming this and we're creating spaces for women of color to intentionally participate in strategic planning and decision making. And of course, Yvonne talked about it before, learning from other radical social movements. Yvonne, next slide. And we're also talking about succession planning. What does that look like, right? The group has recommended that the gender-based violence movement start working on developing succession planning strategies, succession plans, accountability processes. What does that look like in the gender-based violence movement? How do we hold individuals accountable who continue to cause harm to women of color in the movement? Again, strategies that we're addressing as a result of this project, and you've heard it, like we've heard it in various other sexual violence, domestic violence organizations, that this is happening across the country. So it's not isolated to one area. So in order for us to build beloved communities and be a part of creating that community, we really do have to pay attention to the experiences of advocates and survivors in this movement as it relates to addressing racism and white supremacy. So trauma stewardship, focusing on wellness, encouraging, creating conditions where individuals can thrive, in particular BIPOC individuals, with creating communities, organizations, and conditions where individuals can survive and thrive. And that should be defined by individuals and not prescripted. Employee benefits, another recommendation is ensuring comprehensive employee benefits. Again, if you want additional information about any of those strategies, feel free to reach out to me. I love to chat about that project. Go ahead, Yvonne.
Yes, Arlene. And this is another great example. It was a manual created, I would say 10 years, 15 years ago, and I was lucky to be a part of the process. And what we wanted to share with you is that this was created by the community for the community. We needed to create a financial independence curriculum for Latino women across living in the United States. And what we did, we convened focus groups, then from those focus groups, from women from across the United States, then we created some work groups, and we collaborated with a national small business enterprise organization that was led by Latino women. And we created this financial independence curriculum that it's served the women incredibly. We were able to take this information then to different regions in the United States. We created a 3-day training where the women developed ideas for small businesses, and this included undocumented women. So it was tailored for their needs with their language and focusing on goals that were attainable. So that was a beautiful project that was created for them, by them, and we were just a vehicle. And this was done by a National Latino organization.
All right, so throughout the presentation, we've offered lots of nuggets, lots of resources, lots of frameworks, lots of approaches that we encourage you to explore on your own, right? And as you're doing that exploration and that self-reflection, like what, how, where, why, when, who, most importantly, who do you need to be? What do you need to do in order to show up to do this work, and how are you going to do that, right? And what support do you need, and your why? What is your big why? Why do you want to be a part of a movement that's working on creating beloved community? So yeah, that's the reflection piece of, that you should do on your own. Before we move into now talking about self-care and wellness, we really can't do a presentation on beloved communities without offering some wellness strategies and some resources connected to that. And then after, we're going to leave about 5 minutes for question and answers, but just want to bring your attention at the end of the self-care presentation, there's a host of resources for you, and we're not going to go over those slides. We just wanted to make them available for you if you needed additional information. So what is self-care? When we talk about self-care, I'm going to read this because I think it's important. Self-care is best achieved in a supportive environment that allows individuals to bring their whole selves into this space. All individuals, all identities, all lived experiences. Self-care is about showing up for yourself and others. And self-care is self-preservation. Self-care is not optional for Black and Brown survivors, advocates, and preventionists. It is necessary for survival in the oppressive systems where we live, age, grow, work, and exist. And so we started out earlier with how is your heart, right? So we offer some options here. when you're engaging, when you're building community, how do you approach individuals? How do you check in, right? How do you go beyond how are you? So we offer some strategies here. One I want to highlight, how can I support you? What story are you telling yourself today? That's another one. How have you been sleeping? What lies do you find yourself believing? So again, just, some options for you to, ask yourself and ask others as you're building community. We need to move away from how are you? You can incorporate that, but that shouldn't be the only thing, because that really doesn't give you the information about somebody's heart. And then we offer some options for self-care, and we're talking about mind, body, spirit, and soul. So again, you can reflect on this on your own. I do want to highlight seeking moments of joy. I think I mentioned that in my intro. I'm a joy seeker. Work-life balance. Just a few examples, Yvonne, next slide. Finding your social support, connected with trusted individuals, humor. Have some colleagues that I just love that about them. They just bring the humor, and it just brings a lot of light into our spaces. Spiritual, right? Whatever that means for you. I think we all can practice gratitude. I think that's important. And connecting with nature for some, that works. Spiritual resources in your community, right? You need to explore them for yourself and share with others as well. Next slide. And then this is another, what is this? Was this a campaign? It was a focus of NRCDV as we were going through at the beginning of COVID-19, and as we continue to navigate COVID-19 and all the other pandemics that's happening at the same time. It's important that we focused on advocates, right? Advocates as frontline workers, advocates as navigating these same oppressive systems while caring for self, while caring for family, while caring for community. So we wanted to make an intentional strategy, or just be intentional about showing up for advocates. So here are some resources that can help you to do that as well. And burnout. We have to be able to identify burnout, prevent burnout, support individuals who may find themselves burning out, and then offer some healing strategies as well. And so this is where you can find all of our resources, all of our projects. You go to nrcdv.org, and that will connect you to all of our other projects that we have mentioned so far. So Yvonne, I will turn it over to you. Additional resources, and then now you.
Yes, and so you're going to be receiving a copy of this presentation, and you're going to be able to look at a lot of our resources. Because I've been passing the slides, I have not been looking at the chat for fear to disconnect. So I would like to ask our staff to share if we have any questions. Read them out loud for us.
I didn't see any questions in the chat. I don't know if there's other ways for, there's a Q&A box too. So let me check that. I didn't check that yet. Nope, no questions there either.
So if anybody has a question and you just want to think about it, I'm going to pass a slide to our contact information. Let me get. And
Yvonne, before you do that, I do want to highlight the IWD card. I want to say acknowledge Dawn Campbell for her artwork and the promise that she shall be a garden. You all can learn more about our IWD card and our past IWD International Women's Day pieces, and just the words that go along with the pieces. I would encourage you to do that. And yeah, happy International
Women's Day.
Hey, it's after, but we celebrate every day.
We do. And we try to find, well, we work really hard on finding artists that are people of color. So if for some reason, one of you, if you're an artist and you would like for us to feature one of your pieces, you can reach out to us for next year. We're always looking for new talent.
And yes, Yvonne, if you can go to the contact slide now. And there is our information. We both like to have these conversations. So feel free to reach out to both of us or each of us, and we love to connect. Lenka, I see I'm gonna take a picture of your ask in the chat. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, thank you, Lynn, for looking out for the questions. Thank you so much. So remember, we are a National Technical Assistance Resource Center. So if you would like Arlene said, more information, you would like to contact us for, if you have any other questions, if you need materials, we're here for you. That's what we do. We have an amazing group, of people committing to doing the work. And I want to thank them for assisting us behind the scenes here. We have a couple of staff present and also serving at, joining the session as participants. Thank you so much to all of our NRCDVers. And also I want to thank our interpreters that have been doing an amazing job. I know that it's difficult because I also talk fast, especially if it's Spanish. So thank you so much for making our session accessible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. At the end of the session, you were going to see a link to our survey. I would please ask you to fill out our survey. It's really quick. It only takes 6 minutes, and it will help us make our presentations better. And also it feeds it fits us with information about trends and needs, so that we can develop materials that are specific to the needs of our movement. Thank you for joining our session. Thank you so much, Arlene.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Space with me.
And like you said, thank you to the rest of NRCDV staff for their support. And I have to highlight Lynn Dillard, who kept us in line and also completed our submission and all of that. So thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
And thank everybody else.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Thanks for sharing your time, your energy, and your work with us today. I hope that you were able to take something with you from today's training. If you have resources that relate to this training, or if there's a topic you would like a future training on, please share in the comments below. You can find more information and links to resources for this webinar in the description. And as always, like and subscribe to our channel for more videos.